and the story of Queen Esther. It's a very unique book in the Bible. It's 10 chapters. But something which is unique about it is you won't find anything mentioned about God throughout the entire book. In every chapter and every verse you won't hear about God. But even though it doesn't mention God, as we're going to look at today, you're going to see that in every verse, in every chapter, in every page, you will see the hand of God that's involved in every circumstance and situation. And that's something for us today to learn from, because there's many times you'll find in our Christian lives that there will be circumstances or situations that will come up in our lives. And we will question, we will ask, where's God? We may not see God working, we may not see the hand of God. But I want to tell you today that God is there and God is at work. Even though sometimes it's not obvious to us, and maybe sometimes we can't see that happening, God is very clearly at work. And we're going to see that today as we look through the story of Esther. The book of Esther really picks up in a time in Israel's history where they have just come out of captivity. They have been taken by the Babylonians at a point in their history where they were very idolatrous, very wicked, very ungodly. And as a result of that lifestyle, as a result of their disobedience to God, they were taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar, and they were taken into captivity in Babylon. And they're in captivity in Babylon for a period of 70 years. So long, in fact, that they passed from one empire under the Babylonians into another empire under the Persians. And they are kept in captivity for this period of time until we get to a point in the book of Daniel where the prophet Daniel is praying and seeking God, and Daniel understands that God has a future. He has a plan for Israel. And that the period of captivity is going to end after 70 years, and then they are going to be released from their captivity to go back to the land from where they've been taken. They're going to go back to Israel. They're going to rebuild everything that's been destroyed. And from the book of Daniel, you really come into the book of Ezra. Ezra speaks about King Cyrus under the Persian Empire that allows the Jews to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple of God. And so you have the book of Ezra, you have the book of Nehemiah, which are dealing with the period of time where the Jews are released to go back and rebuild the temple, and also to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. The book of Esther really fits in between the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah. It's a period of time in between. You see, it really picks up at a very unique time. Because in the very first place, when the Jews are told by King Cyrus that they are allowed to go back and start to rebuild the temple, there are a group of Jews that leave, but not all of them. You see, in 70 years, there are many of the Jewish people that have become prosperous, not only in the Babylonian Empire, but also under the Persians. They've started to become prosperous. They've started to become comfortable. And so there are many that don't want to go back because in their eyes they're going back to nothing. So they stay where they are. And as you see through their history, they go back and then they start to come under attack and the building of the temple stops. And for a period of years, nothing happens until there is a new king that comes along in Persia named King Darius. Now King Darius says, go back and start to rebuild again. And so they go back and they start to rebuild. But then there is a period of time in between where the story we're about to look at is. And so where we pick up in the story of Esther is, there are many Jews that have gone back to Jerusalem, but there are also many who are still left in the kingdom of Persia. And so what you find when we look at this period of time is you have a group of God's people that see the work of God and the rebuilding of the temple as priority in their lives, that they knew they were in a foreign land, in a place they should not be, and however inviting it is, however prosperous it is for them, they knew they had to go back to where God wanted them. And so they are the ones who are faithful and they leave. But the problem is there are those who are just comfortable to be in Persia, and so we have God's people that are really comfortable in a place they shouldn't be. I'm sure there are very many people in here today that are exactly the same as that. There are those who do not want anything to do with the world. They want to be faithful to God at whatever cost, at whatever sacrifice. They want to be faithful to God and God alone. But there are also many today who still want to live in Persia. They're comfortable, they're prosperous in the world, they don't forget about God. In some way they still want God, but they don't want to leave Persia. That was the time of the book of Esther. So we're going to read from Esther chapter 1. It says, now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. And in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel, that in the 3rd year of his reign he made a feast for all of his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him. And when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendour of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. When these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from the great to the small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtains, fastened with cords of fine linen, and purple and silver rods, marble pillars, and the couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise and white and black marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, each being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered with all the officials of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harborough, Bigtha, Agabah, Zerpa, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing a royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. I'm not going to continue reading because there's too much to read, and so we're going to give an overview really of the story of Queen Esther. But where we pick up, we have King Ahasuerus, who is, as we read, is only in his third year of being king of the Persian Empire. And this king is known really by another name, one that history knows much better, as Xerxes. Xerxes was known as the god king of Persia. He was one of the greatest kings that Persia ever had. He amassed more riches than any other king or any other empire for that matter. He was more powerful really than any other king. He amassed an army which amounted to be in the millions, which was unheard of. A very vast kingdom under a very powerful king. And we pick up in a time where Xerxes has taken the throne from his father Darius. Now Darius tried to conquer the Greeks. He went to war with the Greeks and was eventually defeated by the Greeks in a place called Marathon. And after his defeat, he goes back to Persia. Not long afterwards, we see that Xerxes takes the throne. And all you find is on the mind of the king is that he wants to go back to Greece and he wants to destroy the Greeks. And so what we see in chapter 1 is that Xerxes throws this great feast, this great banquet, which is going to last for 180 days, 6 months. He is put on this feast, and we see that he invites all of the heads of his armies, all of the power within the Persian kingdom, all of the noblemen. Everybody's invited to come. And for 180 days, King Xerxes really shows off the wealth and the power of the Persian Empire. But while they're there for this 180 days, from history we know that they are planning and plotting to go to war with the Greeks. This king wants to do what his father couldn't do. And so basically we see a great feast, a great banquet that's going on. And it says that at the end of the 180 days, he puts another feast on for 7 days of where there is nothing else but drinking every single day. And something that history tells about the Persians is they never made a decision without being drunk first. They felt it was important, and they would never make an important decision until they were drunk. And so as we see that we get to the point where the king himself is merry in his heart, and all of his noblemen, all of these powerful men are there, and they're all drunk. And the king calls for his queen. He calls for Queen Vashti, who was a very, very beautiful woman. And he sends his eunuchs, he sends his servants to call the queen to come. But she refuses to come. Now this isn't any ordinary king. You couldn't refuse this type of king. There's a story about King Xerxes that there was a man within the empire who was so rich and wealthy that he would finance the armies of the Persian Empire. And many of the battles that they undertook, this man financed the supplies that was needed for the army. And in one of their battles, this man and his wife, they had 2 sons. One of his sons died in the battle. And when they came back to prepare for the next battle, the mother of the sons came and she begged the king. And she said, please, let this one son stay at home. She said, I've lost one son. Please just allow this son to stay at home when you go in the battle. And the story goes that the king took the son, he cut him in half. He placed one half on one side of the road and the other on the other side of the road, and he's marched his army through the middle. He wanted to make a point that nobody would come to the king and demand anything from him. So when Queen Vashti says, no, I'm not going to come, this was a major thing. This isn't just a normal no. And we see that he becomes so enraged, so furious with him. And he calls all of his wise men in and he says, she's refused me to come to me. What am I going to do with this woman? And so their advice to him is, dethrone her, banish her, take her from her throne, because if you don't, all of our wives are going to listen to what your wife has done, and they won't listen to us. And so they say, right away, get rid of the queen. Something you see with Queen Vashti is that this queen had some decency about herself, because she knew she was going to go into a room of drunken men who had no respect for her, and all they wanted to do was look and really degrade who she was. And so she refuses to go. There's something for me and you today maybe to learn some lessons from, because me and you need to learn how to say no. She said no, and it changes the future of what's about to happen. There are many times me and you as Christians will have things come in our life with temptation, with sin, with immorality, with ungodliness, and there are times that me and you need to say no. The easy way is always going to be to say yes. The easy way is always going to be to be involved in these things. Sometimes to say no changes not only our future, but it can change the future of people that know me and you. The refusal of Queen Vashti, it meant heartache for her. It meant trouble for her. But she still stood up for what was right instead of going along with the wrong. Me and you need to take some lessons from that. And so we see the story that this king dethrones his queen. After this event, between chapters 1 and 2, you read that there is this pause. It doesn't follow straight on. Because in between chapter 1 and 2, there's a period of 4 years where this king goes to war with the Greeks. He goes to war with the Greeks, and he ends up in a very famous battle in a place called Thermopylae, which is where you read about the 300 Spartans under King Leonidas who battled against the Persian army. It's a very famous battle. They made films about the battle. And he's held there for 3 days by 300 Spartans, which were trying to buy time to hold off the Persian army from getting to Athens, which eventually they do. But they're eventually beat back by the Greek army. And so in the end, King Xerxes and the Persian army returned back to Persia defeated. And this is where we pick up in chapter 2. Chapter 2 says that after these things, when the wrath of the king Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of the kingdom, that they may gather all of the beautiful young virgins to Shushan at the citadel into the women's quarters under the custody of Hegai the king's eunuch, custodian of the women, and let beauty preparations be given to them. Then let the young women who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. And so as this king comes back, he's defeated, he's very angry. And it says that after his anger has subsided, he remembers the queen that had been dethroned. This queen that had been put out of her position for saying no to King Xerxes. And he's advised to send his servants out to go through all of the land, all of the kingdom of Persia, and find out these beautiful young women. Bring them to the kingdom, and they will go under these beauty treatments for a year. They will have all of these different beauty treatments and remedies. They will be made to look as good as they can. And then from these women, they will be brought before the king, and the king will pick one out of all of these women to be the new king of Persia. Now, according to Josephus, we're told that there was over 400 women that were chosen to come into the kingdom and come before the king. One of these women was a young Jewish woman by the name of Esther. Esther was a young Jewish girl who had been orphaned, that had been brought up by her cousin, who we're going to come across in a minute, by the name of Mordecai. She was a very humble young Jewish woman who had nothing. But because of the plan of God, ends up being a queen of the Persian Empire. And she's chosen because Esther was a very, very beautiful young girl. And so she was brought into the palace in Persia to be one of these 400 women to undergo all of these treatments in preparation to go before the king. And to cut a long story short, you're going to see that Esther is brought before the king at some point, and it says that Esther is chosen by the king to be the new queen of Persia. And something you see in the story of Esther is that we don't believe in coincidence. We don't believe that things just happen just by coincidence, just by the off chance, but we believe in something which is called providence. And the word providence means that God is ultimately in control of everything that happens and goes on. And you're going to see the providence of God moving in every part of the story of Esther and in Esther's life. Because in every event that takes place, God ultimately is working. God is bringing to pass every event and every situation. It's like bringing every piece of the puzzle into play so that it's all put together. You see, Esther's life will end up affecting thousands and thousands upon thousands of others. That one woman's life will affect so many others. And also today, there are things we need to learn from that, because our life, in one way or another, will affect other people. Our life will affect the life of somebody else. It's known that throughout our lives, we will meet and speak to and come across 80,000 people. So for the course of my life and your life, you are going to come in contact with 80,000 people who you're going to speak to, who you're going to have some interaction with. 600 of those, you are going to directly impact their life for the better or for the worse. So whether you think you're important or not, whether you think you're significant or not, your life and my life is going to directly change 600 people's lives. The life of Esther ended up affecting far more than that. As we pick the story up and we go through, Esther had a cousin, Mordecai, who looked after Esther and brought Esther up as his own child. Mordecai also had a position within the Persian kingdom. And there's a story that one day Mordecai is in the grounds and he hears a plot to assassinate the king. And so Mordecai goes to Esther and he says to Esther, I've heard these two men planning to assassinate the king. Go and tell the king what you have heard. And so Esther tells the king, and this saves the life of King Xerxes. Now, according to the custom of the Persians, Mordecai should have been rewarded and honoured of what he'd done. But he's not rewarded, nothing happens to Mordecai, which is very strange. But again, God is behind that, because you see further in the story, there is a reason why he isn't rewarded there and then. And so as the story moves forward, we're introduced to another man by the name of Haman. Now Haman, we read in chapter 3, was an Amalekite, and he is honoured by King Xerxes into a very high position in the kingdom to serve under King Xerxes. And this man, as we're going to read through the book, is a very ungodly man. It seems strange how an ungodly man is honoured and exalted, but the godly man who would save the king has nothing done for him. The Bible speaks about that, how the wicked prosper, how they move forward, how they gain more, but ultimately their end is destruction. And the problem in the meantime is that the godly look and they become jealous. And they ask the question, why do the ungodly prosper? Why do the wicked prosper? And this is exactly the same with Haman. Haman was a very wicked man, and it seemed to Mordecai that why is the wicked prospering, God, but nothing is happening for me? But the Bible also says that God never forgets the good that we do. Something that Mordecai will learn later on as the story progresses. And so this man Haman, a very ungodly man, a man of deceit, a very wicked man, but yet he was promoted within the kingdom of Persia. Haman ultimately really is a picture of the flesh. A man that's led by his flesh, a man that's led by his pride, which ultimately will lead to his own destruction. The Bible warns that pride always comes before a fall, and there's going to be no more evident and clear than in the life of Haman. And so we see that Haman is promoted within the kingdom. And while Haman is parading himself up and down in the city, everybody's bowing down before Haman, everybody's worshipping Haman. But out of the crowd, there is one man that refuses to bow down and worship Haman, and that's Mordecai. Mordecai doesn't bow, Mordecai doesn't give him any respect, and this enrages Haman. It enrages him so much that he wants to kill Mordecai. And not only does he want to kill Mordecai, but that hatred grows so much in Haman that he ends up wanting to not only kill him, but kill every Jew in the Persian Empire and everywhere else. There is a reason why Mordecai doesn't want to bow down and worship. There is a reason why. Back before Mordecai and Haman are even born, there are battles that are taking place between the Jews and the Amalekites. King Saul, when he is made king of Israel, is told to go and destroy the Amalekites. He is told to go and wipe the people out, every woman, child and man, destroy everything there is, because the people are so ungodly and immoral, and he is told to destroy them. But we read the story of King Saul that he leaves them alive. And because he leaves them alive, they are a constant enemy to Israel, even to today. They are still an enemy of Israel. We are going to see the consequences of leaving alive the enemy of Israel, because Haman is a descendant of the Amalekites. Mordecai is from the tribe of Benjamin, from the same tribe as King Saul, and that battle still rages. There is always a problem with not putting to death that which is an enemy of the people of God. There is a problem today for me and you when we do not put to death the sin and the ungodliness in our life. If we do not put to death the sin in the secret places of our life, you can guarantee that that sin will rise up at some point and will come and destroy me and you. We have to put to death the enemy of the things of God. And whatever that is in our life today, me and you have to do that. Haman was an enemy to the people of God. Mordecai will not give in. There's a saying by a British politician by the name of Edmund Burke, and he says that all that is required for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Mordecai was a godly man that chose to do something about that which was ungodly. When you choose to stand up against ungodliness, you're not going to be liked for it. You're not going to blend in with everybody else. You're not going to be a friend to those that want to do those things. But let me tell you something. For us to stand up to do what is right, that is the calling of God in every one of our lives. We must stand up against that which is evil. Because if we don't, then evil will prevail. Mordecai was willing to stand up for that. And so we read as a consequence of Mordecai standing up. Esther chapter 4, we read that there is a command that is given by King Xerxes to go and to destroy the Jewish people. Haman goes to the king and he says, there is a people who are not like us. There is a people that have different ways. There is a people that don't act or live like us. They were God's people. They weren't going to live and act like them. And so they stood out. And because they stood out, they became an enemy of the world. And the Bible says that about me and you. For me and you to live comfortably in the world, you've got to be like the world. If you blend in and you can live comfortable in the world, then the Bible says that you are a friend of the world and an enemy of his. God's people will stand out and always be different. God's people will not be like the world around them. And that may cause us problems, it may cause us trouble, but let me tell you something, that's always been what God's people do. And so because of it, King Xerxes says to Haman, take my signet ring. With that you write whatever you want to write, and you put the seal of the king's ring, and that will be made law. And so Haman, because of his hatred in his heart for Mordecai, and his hatred for the people of Mordecai, he makes this decree that every one of them will be slaughtered and exterminated. And so Mordecai is, he's scared, he's frightened, and he goes as close as he can get to where Queen Esther is. Now you can't get to where you can't just walk in now. And so he walks underneath where the window of the palace is, where the women are kept. And he goes and he puts sackcloth on, and he walks to and fro, mourning and wailing because of the future that's been decreed upon the Jewish people. Now, one thing to know, Esther never ever told the king who she was. King Xerxes never knew Esther was a Jew. He never knew who her people were. So when the king says, wipe the Jews out, he didn't know the command that he was allowing was also going to bring the same fate for his queen. It was hidden from him. And so Mordecai goes about mourning, and the servants of Esther look out and they see him, and they say to Queen Esther, Mordecai is outside, he's wearing sackcloth, he's mourning, there is something wrong. And so she says, take these clothes to him, tell him to change his clothes, because if he is seen, they will arrest him and take him. And so they take the clothes down to Mordecai. And in chapter 4, we read about the servant of Esther, whose name is Attach. And Attach really becomes a messenger between Queen Esther and Mordecai. And so Esther's telling him one thing, and she goes down and she gives him the clothes, and Mordecai says, I don't want the clothes. Tell Queen Esther, the king has made a decree, he's about to destroy our people. You have to go into the king, you have to tell him. And so this servant goes back and he tells Esther, and he's going to and fro. This servant doesn't appear anymore. You never read him about him again. He has a very, very small part to play in the big story of Esther. He seems very insignificant. But yet, as a result of the small amount of work that he does, we read that Queen Esther goes into the presence of the king, and everything that's happened starts to change. The very future of the people of Israel starts to change. And it's all brought into place because of one insignificant servant of Queen Esther. There's something we read many times in the Word of God is that there are many people that are part of the work of God that don't get recognition. There are many people who are part of the work of God that are not even named. We don't know who they are, where they come from. Who was the young boy that runs and gets the loaf of bread and the fish for Jesus? We don't know who he was, we don't know his name. But he did something very significant. Who were the men who rescued Paul by lifting him down the wall in the basket? We don't know who they are. There are many people that do something in the Bible who are serving God and who are part of something great, that we don't know about. And let me tell you something, there are many people in here today who exactly the same. There are many people in here today that may not get the recognition, that may not have a big name, that may not be known, but let me tell you something, you are part of the work of God and are important in the work of God. And you are a piece, a cog, and a great, larger machine that's at work. And we are vital. Every one of us are vital in that work. This servant who seemed, and we read him and we think nothing more of him, but without him, things could have been very, very different. And so Esther says first, if I go into the king unannounced, I will be killed. Because according to the Persian law, nobody was allowed to go into the king unless he had asked for you first. You see, the king sat on a throne and was surrounded by many servants of his who held axes in their hand, that whoever tried to approach the throne, they would be immediately killed. And so they couldn't go in without the command of the king. The only way you could be saved if you went in is that if the king held out a golden scepter and you touched the end of it, and that meant that the king would allow you to live. And so Esther at first is afraid. She doesn't want to go in. But then Mordecai says something in chapter 4. And he says to Esther in chapter 4 verse 13, Mordecai told him to answer Esther, do not think in your heart you will escape the king's palace any more than all of the other Jews if you remain completely silent at this time. Relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. You see, Mordecai's words to Esther is, all of your life, every decision you've made, every circumstance that has been changed and path that has been put in front of you, everything that has happened has all come to such a time as this. You see, the providence of God, and Mordecai really is showing Esther that all what has happened to you has brought you to this time, to this moment, because it's you, Esther, that can change the future of your people. It's you that can change their fate. It's you that can change the heart of the king. If you think about it, it's impossible for a young orphan Jewish girl to come from nothing and to be made the queen of an empire. A young orphan Jewish girl to be put into the place of one of the most powerful empires in the world. Even into a position where she can turn the heart of the king of Persia. And so Mordecai says it is such a time as this. And so Esther says, I will go. Even if I perish, even if I die, I will go. And she goes in before the king, and she goes in and she's scared, but just as she comes in, it says that the king exerts his looks, and he has favour for Queen Esther. And he calls her forward, and he holds out the golden scepter, and she touches the scepter, which means that she is saved and she's accepted by the king. And he says, Esther, what can I do for you? And all she does at that time is says, I ask that you and your servant Haman come to a banquet this evening with me. And so she makes this big banquet. And Haman who hates the Jews, that wants to destroy the Jews, comes to the banquet with King Xerxes. And they eat the banquet at Queen Esther. It said this banquet again, the king says to her, Esther, what can I do for you? You have us here. What can I do for you? And again she says, please come tomorrow to a banquet that I'm preparing. You and Haman come tomorrow. And so they leave and she prepares the banquet, but as she goes, as they leave, Haman again is filled with pride. He's the most important man in the kingdom. Look, I'm even having food with Queen Esther now. I'm sitting having food with the king and the queen. There's nobody more important than me. And he walks out, and who does he come across? But Mordecai. Mordecai is standing straight as a poker. He won't bow, he won't worship, and again his heart is filled with anger and rage. And so Haman goes home to his wife and he's telling her, this man, I hate his people. And she says, you know what you've got to do? Build a gallows. Take this man and hang him on these gallows so that everybody can see that's what happens to somebody that doesn't bow down before you. And so he's plotting and he's preparing and gets straight to work on building the gallows. And while he's building the gallows, the king is trying to sleep that night and he's restless. He can't sleep, he's tossing and turning, and so he says to his servants, go and take one of the books of the history of Persia and start to read to me. The books of the history of Persia number in their hundreds. They record every event, every law, everything that's taken place. The servant happens to go and take a book from the collection that just so happens to speak about Mordecai 5 years before, who found the plot to assassinate the king. And the king says, what happened to this man? And the servants say to him, we did nothing for him. And so the king says, go and find this man because we need to honour him. And so they find Haman the next day. Haman comes in before the king and he said, what would you do to somebody that's done this for the king and he's done that? Haman thinks he's talking about himself. And so Haman, he says, you know, you need to put your robe on him, put your crown on him, let him ride your horse, let the people worship him. And the king turns around and says, yes, you know, that's what we need to do. Haman thinks he's going to turn around and says, it's you. But he turns around and says, there is a man called Mordecai, Haman. Go and find him and honour him. Haman can't believe it. His enemy, the one that he hates, now he has to go and honour this man. And so Haman goes and he finds Mordecai, he does all that the king has done. And when he goes back to his wife and he tells her, she says, you're done. You're finished. Now the king has honoured Mordecai, your days are numbered. You are finished. And just as they're speaking, the servants come to call Haman to go to the banquet of Queen Esther. He goes in, he sits down. Now this is where Esther is waiting. This is where Esther's timing is perfect. This is where everything has come to this one point. Because Esther says before the king, that he asks, what can I do for you now, Esther? And she says, there is someone who is trying to destroy my people and is trying to destroy me. And the king is enraged and he says, well, who is it? Who is this man that dare try to harm the queen? And she says, it's this man. It's Haman. It's this evil man. And the king is so enraged, he leaves the room. Haman is scared to death and he falls on the bed of Esther and begs and pleads for his life. And just as he's doing this, the king comes back in. He sees this man on the bed of Esther and he says, will you try to hurt the queen even in my presence? And he takes him, he says, take this man out. And the servants say to him, he is building a gallows for Mordecai. And the king says, take this man, hang him on the gallows that he intended for Mordecai. And And so you see that the life of Haman is taken on the same weapon that he had in store for Mordecai. And let me tell you something, God is able to turn evil for good. God is able to turn death into life. God is able to turn everything around in his time and in his perfect time. Because you see, the whole story of Esther is all about the perfect timing and the providence of God. The story of Esther finishes with the Jewish people being saved, with Mordecai being promoted, with the very destruction that was intended for them completely being turned around. You see, the book of Esther is all about the impossible. The book of Esther is all about the sovereignty of God. It's all about how someone can be taken so insignificant and can be made to change the very future of a kingdom. I'm going to finish in a moment with this. We are all called, like Esther, for such a time as this. In our lives, every one of me and you in here today that stand for God and that serve God, we will all have our Esther moments. We will all have those times of our life where we need to stand up against everything that's going on around us, and we will need to stand for such a time as this and be the men and women of God that we are called to be. And our life can change other people's lives. It will change them. But do we change them for the better or for the worse? You see a story of people that are willing to stand up for the things of God. You will see a people that are willing to stand in the face of death, in the face of destruction, but they are willing to stand nonetheless. If me and you today are saying that we are Christians and that we are people that love God, we must stand for the things of God. We will all have the Esther moments, but what will we do when they come? That is the question today. Esther stood and changed the future of a nation. What will me and you choose to do when our Esther moments come?